be impacted in different ways at different times by a warming world. But broadly, we do worry about polar bears because sea ice, it's just, it's such a tricky conservation issue. Sea ice isn't something that we can kind of just protect by putting a border around it or growing more of it. So it is something we're very proactive about. We have seen this population where we are right now decline about 30% in the last 40 years. In other areas, polar bears are stable, and a couple in the higher Canadian Arctic have increased recently, bouncing back from other impacts that they had by humans. But overall, we do talk about polar bear conservation at Polar Bears International, but we do want to spread courage and hope and support that we can make sure we keep polar bears around. One of the live chats we're going to do later in the year is that we just want to highlight the good news stories that people are doing. So we want to hear from you guys, whether you are involved in lowering carbon in your community or your kids are, or you know of good stories, please send them in to us. We want to highlight all the good stuff folks are doing. We had one of our alumni wrote in today. He wanted us to plug, he's got a great website, lovetoride.net. It's like a community bike share program. And that's something we're trying to push, is getting involved in communities. It's not on the individual shoulders to solve this problem. It's something we can work together. And sea ice is it's so cool. It's the most amazing habitat, and it's so crazy that this bear has learned how to live out on sea ice that's moving and it's cold, and it's so special. And it's good for polar bears, but it's also important for the whole Arctic ecosystem. This fall, we're going to talk about all sorts of cool creatures that use the sea ice. One of my favorite explore cams is the walrus cam. I absolutely love the walrus cam. And those walrus also depend on sea ice. So we don't want to keep it around just for the polar bears. It's for all these really neat animals and for ourselves. Sea ice is like the Earth's air conditioner. So no matter where you are in the world, sea ice is somehow it's impacting the global climate and helping keep you cool and your climate regulated. So we want to keep it around the Arctic, and that means just moving to cleaner energy solutions, which we already have the technology to do. We just have to put the manpower and support behind it and let our leaders know that that's what we want, and then do what we can at home. So I'm sure I always see folks talking about great stuff they're doing, and we're really excited to talk about that. Really excited we can bring these polar bears to you and help everyone kind of feel this connection. This bear we've been watching for a while, this is a comfy bear. This polar bear's bear, I think it moved its head once in the last 2 hours for anyone that's been watching it. And it's just really special to be able to see them, and we want to make sure that we've got polar bears in this region for a very long time to come. That's what we all want to see here. And so how many bears are there roaming Churchill? So again, this is the Western Hudson Bay polar bear population. So we've got the last kind of estimate was 806 bears, which of course there's a large kind of confidence interval, so could be less, could be a little more for sure, but there's roughly around 800 or so bears in this population. We won't actually see 800 different bears here at this time of year. We'll definitely probably see at least a few dozen different bears kind of moving through, so kind of keep an eye out. And again, for those that weren't on the chat earlier, we absolutely rely on our wonderful Explore audience to help us pick out those individuals. So if you notice a bear that's got a certain scar on its back or its face, or maybe, has a limp or a missing ear, which definitely occasionally happens, let us know and keep an eye out for the bear, because we want to see if we can track certain bears and see them day after day, because that is always super fun. Cool. A couple more questions and then we'll wrap up kind of on the hour here. How much body fat does a polar bear need to gain over the hunting season to sustain itself until the next one? That's such a good question, and it's going to depend on the bear. So definitely bears can pack on hundreds of pounds of body fat over the year on the sea ice. They can really pack it on. In the spring, they go through a phase we call hyperphagia, which means they're just gorging themselves on seal fat. When seals have their pups, once the pups are about, 4 to 8 weeks old, they're kind of these really naive, still kind of stupid, just really fatty little popsicles laying all over the ice. And it's a really good time of year for polar bears to go hunting, because they can just slurp up all these really easy calories. And we see polar bears get super, super fat at that time of year. Pregnant females need to get especially fat because, of course, they're going to have to go into their dens, give birth, nurse their cubs, and then not come out again till the spring. So pregnant females in this area can go up to about 8 months without eating, which is just like crazy. Just think about 8 months without eating. We're getting antsy when our lunch is a couple hours late. Especially BJ gets pretty antsy. Not to call him BJ out. He's just going to let me have that one. So yeah, imagine that going that long. So it's pretty cool. So they definitely do need those high calorie seals. There's just not enough kind of calories on land to get them through those times. And do the bears stay together as a group or do they live alone? So of course we do see the family groups, and cubs will stay with their mom for about 2.5 years. After that, we think are generally solitary. We do have some left to learn about that, but Churchill is a pretty unique space where, because there's nothing to compete over, they're trying to save energy, they're not fighting over food, they're not fighting over mates. It's not mating season right now, there's not a lot to do, so we tend to see bears get a little bit social, and some are more social than others, just like people. Some don't really want to hang out with others, and some kind of, I don't know, are a little more extroverted, I guess. So you might, later in the season, see little groups hanging out. And one thing that we like to see on the cams when we can is sparring. And BJ, do you mind maybe explaining what sparring is?
Usually it's just the males that are going to do this. We did see one really bizarre scenario where we maybe thought it was a brother and sister bear, a male and a female doing this, but most of the time it's just the males, and usually it happens when it starts to get a little bit colder out. This is pretty high activity for a well-insulated animal, and this is sparring is just what it sounds like. It's when they're play fighting, essentially. They're kind of honing their skills and sizing each other up to really kind of in a practice setting, so that later on in the breeding season, they may know who they can fight and win against. So we'll see that. We haven't seen it on the cams yet this year, but you'll know it when you see it. I mean, these bears get very aggressive. You'll see them sometimes standing up on their back legs and batting at each other with their front paws. There'll be a lot of biting, especially in the ears and the face area and in the neck. I mean, it looks pretty violent. So, and of course, this is really, like I said, just a time to practice. Maybe you'll see just a little bit of blood, but they're just kind of playing around. We understand that in the breeding season it gets much more serious, and bears are playing for keeps at that point. And so that's sparring. Hopefully we'll get to see some this year.
And how many hours a day would you say that these bears are sleeping right now? I know it's so hard to.
Boy, that is a good question. We should. Maybe we could just sit on one bear all day, and we could run the stopwatch and find out. But they're doing, most of these bears are doing a majority of sleeping. But I do think it depends on which bear we're looking at. Of course, the mom and cubs are going to be a little more active, I feel like. They're going to be trying to stay away from maybe larger males or other bears, just to make sure that the mom can keep the cubs safe. This bear here, who's been laying in the kelp, does not have any cubs, and really just has to worry about its own safety. We haven't seen it stand up yet, so we don't know how big it is. But a bear like this is really just in energy conservation mode and is just hanging out. Not a whole lot going on over there, just napping.
Totally. Yeah, it's tempting to like rumble around and look for other bears, but now I'm so interested to see what this bear looks like when it stands up. I kind of want to like outweight it, but it might sleep all into tomorrow. We got to go back for dinner eventually.
Yeah, we will have to go back to dinner, but we could come back tomorrow and check it out.
Yeah,
see
it might still be here.
It could still be here.
That happens. That definitely happens. So yeah, there was just a quick question earlier about whether bears have lanolin in their fur. So that I believe is something that you sometimes find in sheep fur, something kind of like a waxy substance. They don't have that. They don't have lanolin. But you will kind of see polar bear fur sometimes look a little maybe oily or a bit yellow. Polar bears do have clear and hollow fur. It just looks white to us, and the hollowness helps trap warm heat against their body. But it doesn't necessarily naturally produce oil, but they do sometimes can get oil buildup. We'll see them kind of have a snow bath and scratch around on the ice and snow, and they will go through a molt in the spring. So they'll get rid of, just like shedding, just like a dog would, just kind of get rid of some fur. They do have 2 layers of fur. They'll have a thicker kind of downy layer close to their skin, and then they've got the guard hairs over top there that act a little bit more like a raincoat and keep them, safe from the cold air, cold elements, keep them nice and warm. And then their body fat, of course, is a good insulator, especially when they're swimming. So when they're swimming, the fur is not as effective, but the body fat is. So they've got lots of adaptations to keep warm. Small ears, small tail help prevent heat loss. They've got furred paws, so they can keep their feet warm as they're walking on the sea ice, which is pretty cool. We'll be talking a lot more about polar bear adaptations throughout the season for sure. So if you've got specific questions, let us know. And then, of course, last week, if you check out the chat I did last week with Mike Fitz, we compared some really cool adaptations between brown bears and polar bears. They just live in such different environments. The brown bear is the polar bear's closest ancestor, but they're just so different in so many ways. It's pretty cool. Though they can interbreed. So a little later this season, we will also talk about the growler bear. So if you're interested in the hybrids, definitely stay tuned. Give you a little teaser there. Pretty neat. We have just a couple last questions. How would someone become an intern at Polar Bears International? So a couple different ways. We do have interns that do not live in Churchill, so you could email info@pbears.org to learn more. Otherwise, the folks who hire in Churchill, the requisite is basically be a willing high school student, that has some flexible hours you'd like to work. It is a paid position. It is a really fun position, and we just really love, working with local students. So you can reach out to anyone in Churchill about that. Again, anyone can always email info@pbears.org to find out more. The biggest polar bear recorded, that is an excellent question. I'm going to have to double check that one. I do believe there's one anomaly, like one big bear. It was a long time ago, at least over a decade ago, up in Alaska. And I believe the record holder just cracked 2,000 pounds. It was a big male. And so that's extra large for polar bear. We do see polar bears in this area the big males can get 1,600, 1,800 pounds. Those are the big boys. Females are about half the size of the males. So we'll see females be more around 500, 600 pounds, and pregnant females heavier than that. But males can get extra big, and they are the biggest of all the bears. The biggest male polar bear is going to be biggest than the biggest brown bear. So that's pretty crazy. And again, that's just calorie intake. They need seal fat to get that big, to stay that big. If you think about, human bodybuilders, they're not surviving off a diet of garden salads. You're not going to see Terry Crews eating iceberg lettuce and staying as big as he is. But
we've got some action on the cam here, Lisa.
Cam action. Woo! Finally, because we're starting to wrap up, and the bear knew that people were getting bored of us talking. It was time for some action.
I don't know. I don't think this one's going to go for it.
Just a little stretch.
Is just going to do a little.
Oh. Well, that's perfect. You can see they kind of have a purple tongue, a little kind of spotted tongue, which is pretty neat. Oh, little face scratch.
And that's it.
All right. Well, it was good while it lasted.
Yep.
That's a good way to wrap up the chat. So why don't we just wrap it up there with a little bit of bear activity. So we've got so much more to talk to you about this fall. It's going to be a really great fall. We're going to answer questions as much as we can. We barely scratched the surface today. We thank you so much for tuning in, for being interested in polar bears. We thank our guests, Jody and Flavio, for being with us. We do have a webcast tomorrow for kids, so it's not quite as general as this, but it's still lots of fun if you're interested in checking it out. The schedule of our live chats and webcasts are on both explore.org and polarbearsinternational.org. So check us out if you want to see what you're missing, but you can always go back and watch any archived live chats. We'll also live on Facebook and on YouTube, so you won't miss out if you don't want to, and we'll also pull any highlights of the extra special stuff that happens on the Tundra, and we will repost for you. so you're not going to lose any of the super cool footage. And again, we thank you for your interest. We thank you for anything you're doing with polar bears. Please do make a comment if you do have a good news story, or you know a local school or business or zoo or yourselves are doing something really great in your community to reduce carbon. So maybe you started a bike pool, or you're writing letters to your civic leaders, or whatever it is. We want to hear about it and highlight you and celebrate the good things that are happening for polar bears as we just celebrate hanging out with polar bears. It's going to be a super special season. So again, thanks everybody. Thanks for being with Polar Bears International today. Thank you to Frontiers North Adventures for their huge support of the program, and for Buggy One. And thanks to Explore.org, as always, for helping bring polar bears to you wherever you are around the world from the tundra. So this is Buggy One signing out. Thanks, BJ, for your help today.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Lisa. And we'll chat with you guys very soon.
Yeah, it was a good one. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.